So just before we talk about the Industrial Revolution report that we do every year at Big Data London, what we wanted to do is just break it down a little bit and talk about data-driven business transformation to give you an insight into actually how you do some of the things that we're going to be talking about, because we do find that sometimes the report, it deals with some of the big stuff, the really strategic, scary things, and what we wanted to do before we talk about some of that stuff is break it down into actually how can you make this kind of difference for your organisation. Does that make sense? Yeah, more nodding heads, great. You and I are going to get on just brilliantly. So, just to introduce myself, I am part of the dynamic duo known as Carruthers and Jackson, and because he's not here, I can say, I'm Batman. Now, of those cartoons, I am the one without the beard, at least today anyway. That is my fellow author, Peter Jackson, who works for Legal & General. And the books that we've written so far are the Chief Data Officer's Playbook, which is very much a data book for data people. And then we realised when we wrote that actually we were missing a little bit of a trick, because data people kind of get data. And what we needed to do is reach out to more of the business people, so the chief financial officers, the chief executives, and write a book for them in a language that they would understand, that breaks it down into terms that they can get, because actually we need to bring them on that journey with us. As fabulous as data people are, and all a round of applause for yourself, you are all fabulous, it does mean, I love that, people started clapping, that was great. It does mean that we need other people on this journey with us, and that's where the transformation elements start to come into. Now, just to take things back to really simple basics for a second, and I know, again, that I'm talking to data people, so telling you what data is feels like one of the stupidest things I've ever done, and trust me, there has been many stupid things. But I just wanted to take a moment to data in the context that I talk about it. If I stand here and yell things like red, aardvark, 47, they're kind of meaningless in that context, but they're all individual little pieces of data in their own right. And I like to liken those individual pieces of data to a single piece of Lego. Now, I have a little boy. I have still not over this in case anybody who knows me. My little boy is now 6'4". When he was actually little, if I'd handed him a single Lego block, he would have thought I'd lost my fragile grip on reality, because what am I going to do with that? If, however, I'd handed him a box full of shapes, sizes, colours, vivid colours, he could have taken himself to the moon. He could have created landscapes under the sea. He could have been James Bond for the day. And I think that's the state that we're in with data at the moment. It's our imagination that we need to bring to bear, because that's what's inhibiting us. By pulling lots of different shapes, sizes, and colours of data together, we can do some incredible things. We can actually take ourselves to places that we've never been before. And that's what I'm hoping that you get from Big Data London this year, is that bit of inspiration as to what you take back and bring the imagination and the problem-solving aspects back to what we do with data. But how do you start? This is the Carruthers and Jackson model. Other models do apply. And what we do is we use this to help understand the maturity of organisations. Whatever you do when you do start this journey, it's important to know where you start from. Simply because, if you can imagine, you've got the world's best pirate map. There's a treasure map there for you. And over here, likening to the pot of gold, there is this big, fantastic value from data that you can get for your organisation. This wonderful place to get to. Unless you have some idea about which palm tree you're starting from before you start using that treasure map to get there, you will struggle to get to the end. So the very first thing, it sounds like such a basic thing, but know where you're starting from. And I mean know where you're starting from in terms of organisational point of view. This very much looks at your organisation holistically, because what we wanted to do was break down the data problem. Because data can seem scary to people. Arnold Schwarzenegger's coming from the future, going to kill us all? Not next week anyway. And what we wanted to do was break it down. So you might not solve the data problem overnight, but you can fix a policy, and you might not fix data, but you can skill people up to do a particular thing with it. You might not solve it all next week, but you can deal with the metrics that runs your organization. It's about breaking it down into chunks that the business will understand and can leverage and use as you do it. So once you know your starting point, once you know how you're going to do it, what are the different steps? Now don't panic, I'm not taking you through all 12, otherwise we would be here all day. But I just wanted to focus on one or two of them. And for me, you always have to start with purpose. Now, we talk about data-driven, and we talk about data-enabled, and to me those terms mean two very different things. So if you remember nothing else from what I'm about to tell you, I really hope that you take this away. You can have a data-driven decision, you can have a data-driven project, you can have a data-driven transformation. But unless you are creating a company like Google or Uber or Airbnb, whose service and product is data, what you want to create is a data-enabled organization. Your companies, your organizations exist for a purpose. They exist to create this, implement whatever their business strategy is. And what you're trying to do with data is enable them to do it better. You're unclogging them, you're freeing them, you're bringing your imagination to bear and inspiring them with data, not driving them. Because if that's the case, then we're in a situation where the tail is wagging the dog. Does that make sense? Brilliant. Okay. So start with purpose. Know where you want to take the organization. Know how you want the organization to use that data and how that underpins it. But also, it's worthwhile at this time just taking a quick look over your shoulder and checking the risk, because as much as I want to concentrate on the very positive future that I believe that data can bring for us, there is just a quick look over your right shoulder to make sure that nothing's going to come and bite you as well. And having that balance in how you do transformations is incredibly important. We often hear the phrase that data drives digital, but I think there's an extension to that phrase, which is actually people drive data. They're the ones who are creating data, ingesting it, arguing with it, reviewing it, making decisions from it. They have such a large part, and we don't spend enough time making sure that the whole people aspects of your organization do the right thing. If you can imagine how much more powerful it would be if every single person in your organization got data. If they realized why they needed to actually fill the form in right rather than just click the top of the drop-down box. If they understood why it was important that if something didn't look right to them, that they came and told you rather than just fix it in Excel, because that never happens, right? Nobody else has these really powerful IT systems, and if something doesn't look right to somebody, they take it out, put it in an Excel spreadsheet, fix it. We know that happens time and time again. So imagine if it didn't. Taking the time to bring people on that journey with you is incredibly powerful. Much more powerful, I would say, than hiring 10 data scientists and shoving them in an ivory tower. It's the whole organization moving, the heartbeat, the same step, constantly, in the same direction. Once you cover the people aspects, the hearts and minds, the coffee and cake aspects, then it's about the method. It's about making sure that you can make decisions around it and helping the organization do that in a way that's comfortable. So, do you know who you go to if you have a problem? Do you know who to go to if you need help? Simple little things like that are often stuff that we missed, because to us it's obvious. To the rest of the organization, it may not be. If somebody walked in your organization tomorrow and they noticed something, how would they find out? So how do you make that more visible? How do you make that more transparent? How do you put some of those simple mechanisms in place in the first place? And I have to say, I often talk about the Goldilocks model for this. Not too hard, not too soft, just right. Because what you don't want to do is overload your organization. You're not trying to create war and peace when you're looking at how you actually use and monitor data and analyze with data. You're not trying to create something set in stone that they will never change again. You're trying to create something that treats people like human beings, and you want them to bring their imagination and their problem-solving abilities to bear, but something that helps them do their job better. This is the part where you set them up to succeed. And lastly, but by no means least in any way, shape or form, it's about the tooling that you need to be able to deliver some of those things. Now, the reason I always talk about this last is that because I think we've thrown a lot of money at the IT side of the data problem. If IT and tools were going to completely solve the data problem on their own, they would have done it by now. We have spent millions on different software. There's some brilliant software out there. I am not dissing IT here in any way, shape or form. It is a component. And what we need to do is bring to bear the balance of the other things that we need to talk about to make sure that we leverage this tool to the best ability. Does that make sense to people? Excellent. Any questions so far? It's early, isn't it? It's too early to have questions. Okay. What then I wanted to talk about is actually, you don't want to do open heart surgery on a marathon runner. It would make it incredibly difficult for that marathon runner to finish the race, wouldn't it? Yes? Good. Please just awake. So what you want to do is augment and enhance and help the organisation. If you think about it, how do you help a marathon runner run a better race? It's the small things that you do to help them do it, because the goal of the marathon runner is still to finish the race. The goal of your organisation, it still has to exist. It still has to succeed. It still has to do what the business strategy says that it has to do. But you want it to do that way and improve without killing the patient. That's a very important lesson. If that's the second thing you learn, don't kill the patient. I'm not a doctor, but even I know that part's true. So when we talk about D3, D3 is a concept that Peter and I was talking of creating in the second book, and it stands for Data-Driven Dynamic Business Transformation. And there was just too many letters, so we shortened it to D3 because neither of us have that long an attention span. But that's taking Agile to another level, where actually what you're doing is focusing probably on something more like the cyclists story. If anybody knows how the British cycling team got better, the incremental improvements, it's how you leverage some of that thought and impact into data and use it so that what you're doing is looking for the consequential increments all the time. Again, your whole organisation looking to improve all the time, giving you the ability to know that everybody's trying to head in the same direction. Again, makes sense? See, it's simple, really. When you break it all down like that, it's really simple. And that what the hard part is actually being that data cheerleader. Now, I talk about being a complete self-styled data cheerleader. I absolutely adore data. I stand on stages talking about it. I write books about it. I bore my family rigid about it. Yes, you can all feel very sorry for my family. But for me, it's an incredibly powerful asset that we have really undervalued. And I think the most powerful thing that you can do for all your organizations is to go back and be that data cheerleader, is to talk about the art of data, the art of the possible. What can you do with it? Encourage. Now, I have to say that there are times when this can feel like an incredibly lonely role in organizations, because for some bizarre reason, not everybody gets it. Now, I know that's hard to understand when you're a data person, but there are actually people out there who don't realize why this stuff's important. But it's about education and helping and sharing your passion back in your organizations. So who here would claim to be a data cheerleader? Right, come on, everybody's hand up. Who's going to be a data cheerleader after they leave here? Excellent. That's what I want to see. So go out, enjoy Big Data London, have a fantastic time. And when you take all the knowledge and things that you learn, remember that the most important thing you can do is share that passion with everybody else. Thank you very much.
Let me grab a couple of things here. You taking my chair? You made it. Hey, good. Yes. Just give us a second. All right. Good morning, Big Data Londoners. Yes. Thanks for warming up, Caroline. That was excellent. Appreciate it. We're all cheerleaders. I'm Paul Maher. I'm the founder and CEO of Positive. We are content and PR experts, and we put together, with the help of Caroline and the esteemed steering group here, the Fourth Industrial Revolution report, now in its third year. We've been proud members of the steering group since its inception. As you can see, there's a list of the great and good, and we have decided this year the theme for the Fourth Industrial Revolution report is liftoff for the UK. So 50 years ago, some brave guys from NASA set off on a trip to the moon, and we're looking at a UK economy which is getting close to a trip to the far edges of the EU potentially sometime soon. So we thought there were a couple of analogies that we could pull out there. So the steering group is in fact the brain trust behind it, and I've got a number of the members here which I'll introduce you to as one of our colleagues just gets mic'd up at the back there. So Johanna Hutchinson is the Chief Data Officer of the Pensions Regulator, and she has the perfect CV for this panel. She's a former head of data strategy, a researcher for the Office of National Statistics, and the former regulator of government data at the UK Statistics Authority, which I'm sure a few of you guys will recognise. That'll have some impact on this panel, which I'll go through in a second. Jez Clark is the co-founder of Edensmith. That's the exclusive data staffing partner for Big Data London. Jez has been a successful consultant and director in the staffing industry for over 20 years, although he may not look it. And he's helped many businesses adopt innovative strategies to attract niche talent and help job seekers, importantly, position themselves for this new market. Jason Foster is the founder and CEO of Cynozure. That's a consultancy that helps organizations do great things with data through strategic advice and solution delivery. And Jason spent his career defining, shaping, and delivering strategies which deliver value from data. He previously led big data programs at a small little company you may have heard in the retail space called Marks & Spencer. And Abhas Ricky, hey Abhas, thanks for joining, is the Managing Director, Global Head, Strategy and Transformation of Cloudera, who are a big sponsor of this show. Abhas is in fact an electrical engineer by profession and a seasoned strategy consultant and passionate entrepreneur who brings the big brains to Big Data London in many ways. And he's an experienced advisor to CXOs of the world's largest organizations. I'm sure he'll talk about a few of them this morning. And he sits on the board of multiple tech startups. So if anybody's got any ideas, I'm sure he'll get his wallet out, and maybe you can be sponsoring the show in future years. He also sits on, and he was announced as a global shaper by no less than the World Economic Forum. So I think you'll agree, a serious panel. Could we possibly put our hands together and welcome them? All right, and there's all lovely pictures. So let's get going. We've got a lot to go through. For those of you who've just arrived, underneath your derrieres, you're going to probably find something called the Fourth Industrial Revolution report. If not, there are spare copies knocking about. Certainly, we can furnish you with those. Those are draft copies. The actual final copy is at this URL, downloadable today. So please do avail yourself of that. This is a survey of 500 large enterprises, and by large, I mean 51 million or more in revenues and 250 employees or more, because obviously some companies have very large revenues with not a lot of employees, lucky them. It was conducted under Market Research Council rules and was kindly sponsored by Cloudera. So let's get going and put these people through the tests. Let's start with some good news. Firstly, the confidence is up in the UK. So last year, 28% of those we polled thought Brexit would be a setback in London's goal to be the data capital of Europe. 19% thought our chances would actually be helped, and 17% thought we had no chance of being the data capital of Europe if we were outside the EU. Are you with me so far? This year, the story's changed. So just 14% thought that Brexit would be a setback to London's aspiration to be Europe's data capital. A slim majority, and that's an important phrase in these times, I think, slim majority, 51% saw no effects at all, and 16%, which is actually down 3%, thought all chances would actually be helped. In addition, 7% believed London could not be Europe's data capital. So these are the doommongers. And 6% believed it could, only after we Brexit. And 5% believe Brexit, it's a new addition for this year, 5% believe Brexit delays London's crowning as the data capital of Europe. So let's turn to the panellists now, with the exception of Johanna, who, like all government officials, I'm sure you're aware, are under this fascinating concept of purdah, which means they're not allowed to talk about anything that's vaguely related to the general elections. You're excused for a minute, Johanna, but can I turn to the panellists and get your perspectives on what you think this increased confidence about the UK's possibility of being the data capital? Jason, can I maybe come to you and see what you're seeing out in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think first thing to say is that what we see is organisations are obviously considering the impact Brexit will have, having contingency plans for what will happen through the different scenarios that might play out. But what is clear from this and the changes that we've seen is that there is some uncertainty, clearly. We've all seen that, we've all felt that, and that's what we see in organisations. There's uncertainty about whether to start things, there's uncertainty about whether to pull the plug on things, there's uncertainty about where people should focus. And I think whether London will end up being the centre of Brexit after Brexit, it's one of those open questions, because when will Brexit happen, if at all?
All right, good one. Jez, what are your thoughts?
So it's been really interesting actually listening to, because we're speaking to the market, so from a people perspective, we hear a lot of news on a daily basis, and our business works very closely with public sector and councils across the UK, and there are still a lot of initiatives that are actually taking place to make London the data capital, if you like, either post or pre-Brexit. We've seen some slowdown in the last 3 or 4 months, so actually a bit more of an upheaval trying to actually get things going. Projects to lift off and bringing other boroughs together and projects and programs together. So there's been a bit of a struggle there. However, I think today's a good example. There's a London Office of Technology and Innovation getting going. It's actually launching here at Big Data London later on tonight. We're working very closely with Lottie and City Tools, and all of this stuff is an initiative that's actually powering the fact that London wants to be the data capital, and I haven't actually seen a proper slowdown in that personally in the last few months. I see it quite interesting. There's still momentum and a lot of motivation to get it done.
Yeah, that is interesting. So the Lottie London Office of Technology and Innovation is launching tonight with the help of the Bloomberg Association here. I found my clicker so I can join you now. Abhas, did you want to make a point on this? What are you seeing out there in the marketplace?
Well, the only point which I wanted to make was being the data capital of Europe also varies by industry, because a lot of industries, financial services, telco, utilities have a different impact, what we would see in London versus a lot of the other things. So insofar as specific industries are concerned, which get impacted more, like the financial services or utilities, etc., they are the ones where we're seeing the confidence grow up. However, there are certain ones whereby you see a larger presence in continental Europe, which is transportation or professional services, whereby we see Amsterdam or Berlin or even manufacturing. And from a data perspective, streaming, data analytics, all of that, getting a larger share of the mind share, if I may. And that is how we're seeing the markets move through.
Great, that's a fantastic start. We've got a lot to go through, so I'm going to motivate. One of the things that we ask people is, what do they think is holding London back, and what's reinforcing its position? And top, sort of boringly I would contest, is infrastructure, talent and VCs. Jez and Jason specifically, you guys work with lots of talent, lots of VCs. What are you seeing?
Shall we go first?
Go for it.
Talent's a massive issue at the moment for any business that's going through a data transformation, trying to build and mobilise a team at the moment for any organisation. And of course there's so much misalignment in the market at the moment, uneducated companies about what's available to them with regards to the people that will actually get this stuff done.
Is that good for job seekers? Is it happy
well,
days?
it's more of an education. So let me be really clear, actually. The skills are in organisations. The skills are external organisations as well. It's about understanding what those job functions are, role profiles, the skills required, competencies, attributes, and that sort of thing. So it's more about an education, and also there's a big, there's the fear factor going on quite a lot at the moment, and I think it's more about collaboration and working together to understand the sorts of people you need and how you're going to go about putting those teams together via way of different components other than recruiting from the external market.
Jason, you provide some of those skills.
Yes.
Yeah, we do. I mean, to the point, I think any transformation needs some foundational inputs and some baseline sort of capabilities put in place. So yes, infrastructure, yes, people, yes, culture, and you've got to have a plan for that. You've got to put that in place. Otherwise, there's no chance of winning.
Good. Okay. I'm just motoring along because I want to get Johanna in, and she can't talk about this next one. So it is in your reports. This slide's in there. This is we're headlining this one. The UK government's not trusted on data, which may not come as a massive surprise to everybody, but actually it's slipped 5 places in the order from second down now to 7th. So really, people don't trust that the government have got it right. The winner still are the Information Commission officers. So these people are obviously being trusted a lot, and obviously this is the year when the ICOs issued £250 million worth in its first year of fines to a bunch of companies. Just as a reminder to everybody, tomorrow the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower Chris Wiley will be appearing. So if you are able to join us tomorrow, he's going to be on at 15:50, so 10 to 4 at the Keynote Theatre. The thing that I thought most interesting about these was the fact that sneaking up is self-governance by the tech giants. So we all know who they are. There's no need to name any of these people, but they've actually snuck up one place in our estimation of whether these are the folks that should regulate data. So Abhas, do you want to have a go at this? Because Johanna's still out at this point.
Yeah, I think the first one, the data regulators and the Information Commission's office, as you mentioned, I would assume the large part of that is being driven by GDPR and the regulations around that. And therefore, naturally, a lot of the organizations have to set up a DPO by statutory terms. A lot of the consumers or customers, they believe that that is a safe place to go because that's what they've been hearing about. Insofar as the tech giants are concerned, again, it varies by which stream. So we talked about that earlier, which is if you look at the cloud versus if you look at the mainstream consumer services, the understanding of how I trust that specific provider with my data is very different. Because one of them has a direct impact with B2C and PII data, the other one may not. The other one does have that impact at the end because of algorithmic biases or segmentations, etc. But that's why I would say we don't have the data to split that through, but come next year, if we were to split that through, it'll be a better view and it'll give the audience a better understanding of what it actually means.
Right. And gents, do you want to have a pop at the government at all? Any reasons why the government's going down in our estimation here?
Well, no, what I was going to say on the regulator, I suppose a couple of points there. The regulator, I think it's almost obvious that the regulator is going to be most trusted because of GDPR and because they've been the most vocal, the most visible people saying we're putting this in place to drive up trust in data. The one that surprises me is the tech giants, because actually at a macro level people are trusting the tech giants less, but it's a bit contradictory, which I've just realized, which is that actually when we're talking about moving to the cloud, we trust AWS and Amazon and Microsoft, who are the tech giants that on one hand we don't trust as consumers of their services in many ways. So I've been a bit surprised in that. In terms of not trusting the UK government, I suppose it's my similar point to what I said about Brexit earlier. You know, there is a general lack of trust in politicians and government at the moment in the psyche. So
even amongst data professionals. Amazing. Great. Okay, as I say, we've got quite a lot to go through, so I'm going to rattle on. This is a fascinating set of data. Along the left-hand side and also in your reports, you'll see the rise and fall, as we're calling it, of the CEO. So when we first polled 3 years ago, 2017, to find out who was the most senior person involved, responsible for data in the organization, 0% said it was the CEO. Nobody had the CEO, no CEO that we polled at least, had data responsibility. In 2018, that leapt right up to 15%, so nearly 1 in 7 of the organizations did have, that's where the CEO was directly responsible for data. And this year it's fallen back to 9%. So some people might talk about some of the high-level breaches. British Airways is one, Marriott, etc. But I'm going to put this tough question to the panel. Why are the CEOs running for the hills? And Johanna, please do feel free to come in on this one. Go first?
Yeah, sure. So I think basically what we're just seeing is a micro trend here. So as the GDPR legislation came in, what I certainly saw from a financial services and a public sector perspective was coming up to the deadline of GDPR legislation being enforced, is that most organisations weren't quite to where they wanted to be, should we say, in handling privacy and the personal data that they held on their estate. So actually what happened within organisations is the risk of non-compliance against a new regulation just rose through the organisation, and without an established function within the organisation, it had to hit the CEO or the CEO's office, and therefore became the CEO's responsibility. The response to that, of course, is to put in either an operation to mitigate the risk in which they're covered, or in fact organisations have actually dealt with GDPR and actually feel a compliance over it. So I think what we're now seeing is both the trend to increase the CEO and back down. I think it will remain down now, but also you'll see an increase in data governance in the DPO office and in the operations which actually manage and run the privacy aspects of data within our organisations.
Anyone else want to chime in on the CEOs?
I'm disappointed that it dropped. I don't think I'm surprised. I'm desperate for something and use cases that are as big and grand as GDPR that organisations then grapple on, that then CEO wants to take it on. What we haven't got is an equivalent, a really positive opportunity-driving equivalent that GDPR brought along that means the CEO wants to look after it. And organisations that we work with that are as excited about the opportunity that some of their use cases can deliver, the MD, the CEO absolutely grabs hold of it and says, this is my initiative. So ironically that, however, 10% is actually still quite a good number.
So their loss is sort of what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Jez, you seeing the top guys coming to you? Are you working at a different level? Because just in terms of where that responsibility's gone, it's gone out largely to the DPO or CPO, as we call it, Chief Privacy Officer. It's also landed, so 7% of Chief Data Officers and CIOs, 5% have CMOs, and this new role of Chief Privacy Officer as the ultimate C-suite person in charge of data. Who are you dealing with? How's it changing?
I find it fascinating because I totally agree with what Johanna's saying. Is because where the risk is in the organisation and how the size of that risk, it will end up with the CEO, especially with something like GDPR. But let's just be really, really real about all of this. The power base, we look at it, we call it a power base. Wherever that risk is, it's going to sit within that function of an organisation for a period of time until it gets sorted. And actually, right now, when we're talking to businesses, they probably have one DPO, one CPO, whatever it might be in an organisation. GDPR has been done, that main risk has gone, there's one person there to maintain it. So we're in maintenance mode at the moment. So let's be real, the next big thing that comes up, there'll be someone and it will shift again to someone else. And there'll probably be a brand new job title that is created for the fun of it to confuse things even more. And then we have to try and work around that. And this is going to change and change and change.
This is data-driven London. We want these new jobs. New job titles mean new jobs, right?
They do, but it just confuses the matter again. Every time we create new jobs and new functions in an organisation, just based on something we think is great, or it's there's a bit of hype around it, it just confuses the market.
Hold that thought, if I may. Sorry, Abhas, jump in on this one. So, what are the barriers to data-driven organisations? And it seems it varies depending on who you are. But one thing that's clearly never going to go away is budget. So budget for creating the culture, budget for just putting in the tech. Abhas, you sell to a lot of enterprise organizations. You might have a war story or two you could share. I don't want to put you on the spot, but what are you seeing budget-wise as being a barrier to building this data-driven culture?
So I'd say again, because the responses are structured by industry, so I'll start with the one which is the fascinating one, which is telcos. So if you look at majority of the telcos, they have this huge pressure on CapEx versus OpEx spend. And that is one of the key drivers in terms of budgeting, and that's where IT comes into the picture. If you look at software companies, a lot of them, they try and transact with organizations in what they call as an ELA, which is pretty much a way for them to transact and put that as part of a CapEx spend. So that is a key driver. But the other thing also is for CapEx intensive industries, telcos being one of them, because you naturally have to innovate with an absolutely net new infrastructure and network within the next 3 to 5 years. And now obviously with the rollout of 5G, there's a lot of spend that goes through for that specific section. So that naturally means one of the two things. Either you need more software or services, etc., to support the infrastructure spend that you've had, or you're just going to delay that for a few years because you just don't have budget. So I do believe that budget is a key part, and it plays out differently in cyclical industries as it would in industries that are not so cyclical, for that matter.
Budget challenges for specific sectors, or we've seen a lot in telco and financial services from an upskilling perspective. I think we're going to talk about that in a bit, but it's interesting because from a people perspective now, it's more CapEx, it's more contract project-led to get this stuff done at the moment, and that's why there's challenges on the other side. It's the only way they can go.
But there's been very few budget challenges, I think, in the public sector, right, Johanna?
So, yeah, in the public sector, there are large budget challenges, but actually what the government have done through austerity measures is invest in technology, and that's in the public realm, so, you can look at all of that. What we need to reflect on here, though, is that all transformations are really hard on organisations. They're hard on the people in which we are inflicting our data-driven culture upon. And if you reflect on the teams in which you're expected to change to work in the way that you want, even when you feel that the impact that you'll give will have massive value to the organisation and to the way that they work, they're still trying to do their day job. They have, we have customer support teams. Those customer support teams have to meet certain targets. They have to meet those targets regardless of what transformation is going on underneath, regardless of what new technology they have to take on, what training they have to undergo, what culture that they need to now work in to get the information in the same bloody system half the time, in the same way, because we need it in a different format. So the challenge is hard. So some of it's budget, yeah. And where do you put budget? So certainly put it in training. Then you have to put it in upskilling. Then you have to put it in culture and ongoing, conformity of that organisation. But it's much more about people than it is about budget.
It's interesting because Caroline was just talking about data cheerleaders, and the third biggest barrier here is enthusiasm from current employees. Now, you guys get injected into those situations with a magic data solution. Have you got any war stories from the field about either resistance or support or data cheerleading that you can share with us?
Well, I just, so there's a couple of things actually. I know we like a good headline, and this talks about the barriers of people. I like to see that it is people that's going to make this happen. Caroline said the same thing, right? And so I don't like it being seen as that humans and people are the barriers here. I like this saying that what's going to drive the change is people and that cultural aspect. I also think people struggle with budget, and we have this with clients. Where they struggle with budget is where the outcome and the value and the upside has not been articulated well enough or isn't clear enough. Then you have budget challenges. As soon as you're able to articulate and show and prove that what this data thing's all about is about driving some benefit to the organisation, and you can articulate and show that, budget challenges go away.
So I completely get that, Jason, just to come in, because I know they like a bit of conflict on these panels. But actually, it's not just about walking it over the line, because once you've walked it over the line and you've got your money and you can start investing, that's fine. Yeah. It's about actually delivering the benefit and the value.
Totally.
And what we really seem to struggle with is being able to articulate that accurately at the beginning, that people actually can get on board and understand to be the cheerleaders, to actually get the delivery that people perceive at the end.
Yeah, my point is about getting budget up front. Budget up front, if you can articulate size of the prize, is where I see it being easier if you can articulate the size of the prize. It doesn't make the budget challenge or the implementation any easier necessarily, and there's a lot of work you've got to do.
No, and your culture isn't changed by getting the budget.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Damn it, we're agreeing.
It's not what we want. All right, let's talk specifically for the more technically minded on some of the buzzwords and tools. And you can see that our big shock here when we looked at this, obviously this is Data-Driven London. A lot of people think data-driven and AI and ML and alphabet soup of acronyms is what this show's about. Actually, strangely enough, we noticed that those who are planning to implement things, the word AI and machine learning, those phrases died off a little bit. And to our great surprise, the big winner this year was business intelligence. And I know that we were just having a good conversation about this. Can you tell us what you're seeing with this? We thought it was dead. It's back from the grave. What's going on?
Well, BI has been around for a very, very long time, and there's plenty of people in the market. So I would say it's very easy to gravitate, because we're working with customers doing big BI programs at the moment. Very easy to gravitate to that area, if you like, because there are skills available, so you can get program done. But ultimately, what's actually happening in the market is the skill base that they're looking for in the people to deliver the programs hits more on the data viz side. and there's still a scarcity in that area. So it's quite interesting why BI has all of a sudden become, such a big thing at the moment, or whether the programs are really cooking off at a size, as opposed to they've always been there.
So Abhas, are you busily rewriting all of your marketing literature to have business intelligence back in it now, or what are you guys seeing about this phrase that's back from the grave?
Well, I think it manifests in what we're seeing in the industry anyways, right? So we saw the whole Salesforce Tableau merger acquisition. We also saw Google jumping in with Looker and anything else. And I think one of the key correlations between the real-time analytics, BI, and the data visualization is the whole storytelling bit. And going back to the point which Johanna and Jason was making earlier about the whole value piece. So it's not only about the fact that you've invested into a specific technology and you have outlined your programs of work, but you actually have to tell the story to the C-suite, to the board, to the customers, etc., for them to be able to understand what the outcomes are. And I think that's where the whole storytelling for manifesting the business outcomes, it becomes more important. And one of the key things that we saw on the AI front is AI is, I would assume, is going through the classical hype cycle. But it's only last year when a lot of people have started to segment AI into various categories, and one of them being as basic data engineering. So a lot of the people, a lot of the industries out there, they were doing classical data engineering, they were calling them as AI. But actually now they've started to realize that's not really AI, that is part of my normal day-to-day functions as part of data management, and therefore I need to differentiate that.
You know what else is really interesting about this as well is that you mentioned storytelling, and I totally agree with that, because last year, according to the survey and the report, it wasn't even on the agenda as a competency of an individual last year, whereas now apparently 25% of the people that were part of this report have said that storytelling is actually a skill. Yeah. So you can see the change.
So from my perspective, I think BI is about increased assurance. So another one of the questions is talking about what's on the minds of CDOs going through, and actually quality and governance are starting to come through time and time again. So yes, we've got innovative new ventures that are coming through, and we're all interested in keen in those. And of course, they've got a lot of work to do to prototype and to set those up and to do the assurances on them. But there's still the remaining question by the organisation of what is happening in my business. Yep. And getting that assurance and that quality of that assurance across the organisation falls back into good governance, GDPR, and that general momentum of keeping a business in the BAU function valid.
And to add to that point is one of the points that I believe we'll see hopefully next year is that I assume there's a direct correlation with cloud. Because I said this last year as well, which is before cloud, IT were the provider. But now, because of cloud, lines of businesses have a lot more control. And IT becomes a provider of providers, and their value add is primarily governance. So naturally, if I'm a lines of business, I would gravitate towards the whole storytelling bit, the business analytics bit, rather than some of the more core engineering functions. So I would assume that as cloud manifests in production mode, over the years, we'll probably see more of these to come through.
So you're really giving some career advice. Storytelling, that's the way to position your CV. Jason, what are you seeing?
Final thought maybe on this is that the correlation between AI dropping back a bit and BI coming up a bit. So partly this is the industry being its own worst enemy and using phrases and terms and buzzwords that are unhelpful. And I think part of it is that in terms of the hype cycle, AI people wanted to go into that, which is why we saw the results last year, and the recognition that there's a whole bunch of work you need to do in terms of getting ready to do AI, part of which is just good old-fashioned insight, understanding where are we, lead and lag indicators. I don't think BI ever went away. I don't think it ever went away. I think we stopped talking about it as much, but we were always doing BI, and I think it's certainly one of the most important assets of being really good at data.
Slightly depressing, because I would like Brexit to go away at some point. Is AI going to take your job then? Well, according to our data, it might if you're a banker, but otherwise less to worry about. So we're asking what the biggest challenges around AI were, and financial sector, again it's in your report, the financial sector picked out the fact they might replace their jobs. Other people were more interested in things about inaccurate AI models. We've seen this week about a bias in some of the modeling on the Apple Card. Guys, what do you think the biggest barriers to AI? I mean, Abhas, can I start with you? You're probably the most in the front line on the technical side of this?
Yeah, so I would say I'll start with the financial services bit. I think we discussed this earlier, that it depends upon what kind of use cases you have. So financial services organizations, not the Monzos of the world, the ones that we know of, the large banks, the large insurers, the large asset managers, etc., they've had legacy infrastructure and legacy IT for decades, and they have this habit of never switching off anything. So majority, we talked about this budget, and majority of their spend goes towards keeping the lights on. So naturally, in terms of use cases, yes, whilst they're innovating in terms of building up new use cases to deliver business outcomes, a large section of what they have is still legacy. So with the onslaught of technologies like RPA or anything like that, naturally there's a higher likelihood of some of those tasks being automated. Now, whether that manifests in you taking my job, I think that's a bit far-fetched, but I would assume that's the sentiment going towards that. But towards the other thing which you mentioned in terms of the biases, yes, we're seeing a lot of biases. There's a whole debate going on in terms of biases for AI models in terms of gender or facial recognition being a big part of that when we're doing simulation tests, etc. I think a large part of what we're seeing is that if you look at industries whereby AI really comes into the picture in terms of image recognition, or be it LiDAR data for autonomous vehicles, etc., a large part of that is assisted AI. So they offshore with 30,000 people in Asia, in Philippines, in India, etc., and they're actually physically looking at the images and tagging them. And that's for medical imaging, that is for transportation, etc. And once we change that, once we're able to actually convert that into predictive and diagnostic and prescriptive, all of that, through algorithms, that's when we have to be careful about the bias, and we have to build tools which naturally take care of that. So I think it'll become a more and more important subject as those functions get automated, but for now, it's still assisted AI, and it's actual people who are doing the work.
I think, just to come in completely on that. So, but what we're looking at with assisted AI and these technologies are new technologies and new industries that are going to come through because of the technology advancements and the designs that we have there. So just to put that in context, the perception of people is quite different to actually understanding these new sectors and the new way of working with data within these sectors. So I was taking my child around high schools recently and looking at school provision, and in the technology area, I'm saying to the technology guys, so do you code? Are you teaching coding? I'm expecting that they're going to learn to code at high school. It's a fundamental skill. And he basically came out with, well, we do a bit of Python, but, to be honest, they're not going to need that much anymore, are they? Because the algorithms will all be written and they'll manage themselves. So that's the perception of a teacher within a school where our children are going to. Actually, no recognition of how we take that forwards, but also the issue is that we need these kids that are going to come through with these skills to run these future sectors that haven't even been devised yet. So are they going to take our jobs? They're going to make our jobs, but we have to make sure that we have a skill set that can actually fulfill those needs.
New jobs, guys, what do we think?
Well, I was just trying to... it's hard not having the mic on. I think the teacher's right. I think I always thought I'd have my kids go through coding and learn how to build apps and Python, all this kind of thing. The algorithms will do a lot of that stuff. They'll do a lot of the data management. They'll do a lot of the API connectivity. They'll do a lot of the sorting out of data. What I want my kids to do is humanities and sociology and be able to use their hands. And I think that teacher's right, actually. I think that's super insightful. But in terms of some of the bigger barriers that we've got, because I don't want you to respond to that.
Okay.
I'm gonna take that later.
Only for time.
We'll do that afterwards. Well, just one thing, which is I think the biggest barrier is the confusion about what AI is at an exec level. So there's noise, it's messy. Most of the stuff that bubbles up into the press is AI is going to take our jobs. We're all doomed. It's very dystopian. Yes. And I think that worries people, and they don't really know what the actual impact of AI will be on
You're going to set that straight right now.
What the actual impact of AI will be. We've got too much time required.
No, I'm just linking in with a few points the guys have made, actually. So talking about legacy, talking about skills for the future. So we're just actually replicating our own business model and started to build talent pools for the future smart cities. And interestingly, when we look at RPA and we look at AI, 5G networks, IoT, actually, when we dug down into the technologies required to get this stuff up and running, IoT, for example, sensor technology, it's all embedded C programming, which we were doing 15, 20 years ago. So I said to my guys, I said, like, well, actually, what we're going to do then, we're going to go and hit the network that we had 20 years ago, or we actually need, what we need now is a whole new range of people, software engineers for the future that will do this stuff, because in the networking side, it's not as complex, but when you're looking at IoT technology, which will power smart cities and RPA, that's old. Some of those skills they're legacy skills. Yeah. So we need to retrain this stuff with a new head on for the future.
Brilliant, love that. Great. Speaking of skills, we asked people about what the mix of technical and business skills that they needed were. Last year, we were very excited because we saw a lot of non-data roles, the storytelling roles that we're talking about, come to the fore. And this year, a lot of respondents are looking to upskill or redeploy existing staff with transferable skills. However, we also asked this year about robotics and automation, which just came up. And now an increasing number of respondents are looking into that as well. 39% looking at the technical skills and 41% at the business skills. So I know we were talking a little bit before we hit this. Up at the top here is still upskilling people. That's going to keep the guys that are providing skills and talent pools in work for a long time. So we'll come to you in a second. Johanna, are you upskilling your people? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's in these areas, learning and development is the biggest graft, and of course, what we're seeing is a high turnover of staff within these data teams as well. Particularly because as soon as they've got these great skills, then they're offered other jobs in other organisations, so they become very lucrative to the sector. So this is a spiralling, continuous process that you have to continue to invest in. Is it just my team? Well, actually, no. We should be working in large interdisciplinary teams with the business, with IT, with all the functions that are around us, DPO's office, and really developing the whole functions across the office to respect, understand, and align back to your data function. So it's not just the data team. And I think the pressures aren't actually recognised yet across the other adjacent functions to enable some of the work that actually is necessary and coming through some of our pipelines.
Abhas, just talking about how this affects how you sell, because you're putting in tools into place. Sometimes you're working with third-party outsourcers. We're asking people where they go for those skills, and more people are looking for the technical skills from outsourcers. How do you play in this market when there are people that you can sell directly to and other people that you're selling through with your tool set?
So I think we're fairly unique because we're a completely open source organization. So we have our own professional services organization, but we don't want to be a services organization. So we have a stated goal that we're building enterprise software. They are just there to make sure that they're proving the value right at the outset, and then people can see, and then you work with whichever SI there might be. So to your question, we work with any SI out there. We work with a very large ecosystem of more than 2,000 partners. Some of them are very niche and specific skills in specific countries. Some of them are the large ones, and some of them the outsourcers. I think the difference, what happens is, if you're a large organization, naturally you have a huge pressure to cut costs, and there's a cost to achieve. And a lot of the times you might end up compromising in quality, because naturally you're not going to get the same thing with someone who's charging a day rate of $2,000 a day versus $500 a day. But at the same time, it's not always important to rely completely on services. You have to bring a lot of those knowledge transfer in-house as well. Otherwise, with every new technology, with every new use case, you will be caught up in this cycle of upskilling the organization. So there has to be a transfer of knowledge that has to happen. And I think that is what we tell majority of organizations as well.
Great. Guys, on the supply side, a little bit more, do you find that people are upskilling? And are you helping them upskill, or is it just put those people in there?
Whenever there is new technology or new skills required in any market, you'll see businesses will gravitate immediately to training and upskilling. This is a much quicker way of doing things. And it's actually one component of what we would call workforce engineering, if you like. So you need multiple bits and pieces, training and mobility and succession, all this sort of stuff. But what was quite clear in the report as well, 75% of businesses were saying that it was their biggest challenge in getting the budget to do the upskilling. So whilst they want to go ahead and do that,
they can't.
They're actually restrained to actually get that going, and therefore they go somewhere else to go CapEx and start spending on contractors, which is a challenge for any organisation in itself as well. And they go out to the external market for permanent recruitment. So the whole thing has a knock-on effect to how businesses can move forward quite easily.
It's also, it's kind of convoluted, isn't it? So, with the best will in the world, you can bring a contractor in to do a discrete piece of work and then they go again. The right way that, we try to work with contractors is to bring contractors in to upskill your staff by being there and leave your team in a better position. So what is upskilling? What is learning and development? We do lots of different avenues here. It's not all formal learning in classrooms. Actually, being around different people, having a different opinion, being at Big Data London and hearing different opinions and different talks going on is all part of upskilling. Does it have to all cost? Or can it come out of a CapEx budget? I'd argue that actually, if you have an engaged bunch of people working in transformation and engaging with the sector, you're upskilling.
But I also think that it depends upon what structure you have. So a lot of the organizations 5 years back, they went heavily into this concept of center of excellence. And that center of excellence had multiple structures. Some of them had federated, some of them had hybrid structures, which meant that if I'm an organization whereby I want IT to sit next to lines of business hand in hand, there's an upskilling in terms of the business domain expertise as well, so that I can have a better solution, which is very different from an upskilling of the core fundamental technical skill. So it also depends upon the way you've structured your organization, and that kind of depends, to your point earlier, is that the whole CapEx, OpEx budget thing, it depending upon where the money is flowing, because ultimately it comes down to what is the impact and what is the value I'm seeing against that resource allocation.
Let's move on just for time. Sorry. Got to get through this because we also got a second slide on skills, and this is the bit about data visualizations. Sort of interesting slide to read, but the larger the planet, the larger the need, and so down on the bottom are where all the big planets are in terms of data visualization, which came out very strongly, and specifically polled highly in manufacturing, pharmaceutical, public sector, retail and distribution, utilities, and insurance. And I know that this was a good source of debate. Who wants to take this one on first? Abhas, I'm going to pick on you.
Yeah, sure. So financial services, pretty evident. Compliance is a big one because they're a regulated industry. But I think the interesting thing for me is the data visualization for financial services and pharmaceuticals, because both of them have had processes whereby they've been collecting data for decades. It's not a new way of collecting that, but it's what they're doing with it. It's actually, are they able to convey the story, as I said earlier, to their higher ups? But I genuinely believe that, and I don't think we have a slide about cloud adoption. I would assume that if there is cloud adoption by industry, there would be a correlation to that bit, because I again would like to emphasize that is a large reason of why we're seeing the change and shift in behavior, because lines of businesses look at data, but they also look at insights, versus if you look at IT, they look at data and the quality of the data, and is it accurate, is it governed, etc. Both of them are important, but it's just the shift of power in terms of who's actually taking the actions with the data and the insights, which matters.
Got it.
The fact that visualization is one of the biggest barriers really depresses me.
Really?
And a good friend of mine over in New York who runs an organisation called Peloton, a guy called Graham Hogg, talks about the dashboard and the visualization isn't the goal. The goal is change. The goal is outcome. The goal is doing something different in your business, not a dashboard. And if visualization is the biggest barrier to being successful here, then whoever we talk to is trying to do the wrong thing in the wrong way.
So, yeah, it's interesting. My interpretation of this is basically, across sectors, the biggest risk to any data-driven initiative that we have is change management, and we're seeing that reflected quite strongly. So over a third in all sectors are saying that it's change management, which goes back to the point that it's people, it's hard, it's on top of the day job, and it's constant change at the moment. Yeah. We're expecting that in the sector.
Wow.
Yeah. Culture.
Some harmony breaking out. Then we were looking at analytical... There's a classic, in fact, I'm going to credit Abhas for this. There's a classical way of looking at AI and analytics, between descriptive to diagnostic to predictive to prescriptive. I'm not going to ask you to go through the rigorous explanations, but there's some big difference in maturity. What do you see in terms of where people are at on this?
Yeah, I believe it's pretty much in line with what we're seeing in terms of data maturity in general. So if you look at utilities, for example, a majority of what they're doing is still in predictive, and they haven't gotten to the prescriptive stage yet, because a lot of the use cases like smart metering or smart grid, etc., they are still in the install phase. So I am not onto the point whereby I can actually tell customers, hey, you should be doing X as an outcome of the prediction. But if you look at some of the other industries, such as manufacturing, there's an equal split in predictive and prescriptive because of the fact the whole industry is moving towards mobility and autonomous, and they've already started to test a lot of those use cases out there, which has a large percentage spending or percentage of time spent on that. But the most interesting for me was the retail one. Retail's been there for decades, and they're probably the first ones to play in the data and analytics space, and there's almost an equal split, which to me tells that they haven't actually taken the advantage of an early start. So yes, they're onto predictive yet, but I would have hoped that a lot of them are onto prescriptive yet, because they have advanced apps, they have correlation with a lot of the consumer behavior, etc., which a lot of the other industries don't. So that was the most surprising for me.
With the exception of Amazon, obviously.
Yeah. I was about to say that. I didn't want to bring that up. Like,
Okay, no
I was thinking more the Tesco's of the world than anyone else, yeah.
Guys, where do you think people are on their journey? Where are you getting asked for the skills? Analytics, predictive, prescriptive, diagnostic?
I don't think people necessarily think about skills and implementation and change in that way.
Yeah.
But I think that this aligns with the BI business intelligence comment we made earlier. It's actually about 50% of every industry is at the sort of diagnostic and descriptive stage, and I think that's all right. You're right. This is people trying to work out where are we going, what happened, why did it happen, and humans are trying to make those decisions, which is why we see a sort of squeeze on the predictive side. So I'm not sort of surprised by this.
Doesn't surprise you. Okay.
But the retail point is a really interesting one. You know, they were definitely the leaders in doing data. dunnhumby, Tesco's, you know, that led the way. Loyalty programs, and we've never quite moved on. And I actually think that's probably consumer led. You know, do we want Amazon, sorry to use them as the example, to just send us a white shirt because they think we might want one? No, I absolutely don't want them to do that yet.
All right, great. A few slides to get through. So very quickly, a couple on cloud. Abhas, you liked this one. What we're looking at here is migrating analytical roles versus operational roles. This may have flipped around a little bit since we last looked at it, but over a third of businesses are migrating to the cloud their analytical workloads. However, operational migrating to the cloud is expected to increase over the next few years, or is it? Discuss.
Yeah, I just a big caveat on my forward. I had expected to change some of the lines. I am not saying that the cloud adoption is veering towards private. I think it's actually veering towards hybrid. And by hybrid, I mean multi-vendor, but also multi-cloud environments. So what we're seeing in the industry is that a lot of the analytical workloads are moving on to public cloud, because that's all about agility, and you want the cloud economics play a very smaller part to it. But if you look at the operational workloads, majority of them, they reside between on-premise and IaaS because of the fact that that's business continuity. So you can't just lift and shift and not worry about the cost or the risk, etc., because I am running mission critical applications such as cybersecurity, which need to run 24/7, 365, and therefore we treat operational workloads very differently, and the timeline's much different versus a net new workload which I would run in an organization such as Netflix, who were born in the cloud, and the primarily majority of their workloads are analytical by nature.
Right, great. And I'm just going to flick through because I want to get to the final slide. So here's another slice of the data that we took around ephemeral workloads, by which we mean, of course, less than a day's duration. Abhas, did you quickly want to take us through what your thoughts on this one, and then we'll close off and maybe get a question on one or two?
I mentioned this on my talk last year as well, which is most organizations do not have a cloud strategy by use cases. When they look at their cloud spend or the cloud TCO, they allocate that by business units. But actually, when you start looking at a use case level and you start actually calculating what percentage of my workloads are A, ephemeral in nature, and B, for how many hours in a day I'm going to run through that, you will be able to optimize your spend. So we did an analysis with one of the large banks whereby the cutoff was 12 and a half hours, meaning any workload which is running for more than 12 and a half hours a day, on-premise was cheaper. And I think it's an important understanding so that you can have a better view of your hybrid strategy at a use case and a workload level, because that's how you optimize your spend and also your deployment patterns rather than looking at a business unit level.
All right, last slide, I believe. I think this is one for the future. So it has come up in conversation, data ethics versus data privacy. Obviously, there are new job roles. And so we ask people, who's responsible for data ethics and who's responsible for data privacy? Of course, you can have lots of privacy without any ethics, as we all know, unfortunately. But in terms of responsibility, it seems that CIOs and CTOs are more responsible for privacy than ethics. And if we look, not unsurprisingly, at the Data Ethics Board, they're more responsible for ethics than privacy. The Chief Data Officer, though, is veering towards ethics rather than privacy. Anybody want to take this one on? We'll probably grab one question if we have time. So
I just agree with this. I think that's right. The privacy is driven by yes, policies and processes, but massively it's about security and locking things down. And this, I love that the CDO feels more responsible for ethics, because we've got to get our algorithms and predictions that are ethically sound. And it makes a lot of sense that the ethics board look after ethics a lot.
Indeed.
I'm just surprised that so many people have one.
Yeah, interesting. Good.
I think
Let's go along.
Just to add to that actually what you want is the division of responsibility across those two areas, because that helps your span of control across the organisation. Privacy is very much legislation-based. Give it to your DPOs, let them hold that piece, whilst you concentrate on the ethics, which are the culture and the heart and the industry within which you work.
That's great. I love that. Jez, did you have any points? You doing any work in ethics? You've got no ethics and no work in ethics?
No.
All right, great. We're probably up on time, so I'm going to very riskily see if anybody, we've covered a lot of ground today, but did anybody want to make a point about some of the points they've seen, or maybe ask a question in the crowd? Just stick your hand up, I'll take it. Yes, sir, you're first in. I don't have we do have a mic. As Amanda darts down the aisle here, microphone in hand. Anyone else has got one? Maybe stick your hand up so we can make this happen quite quickly. Do it. Yes, sir, away you go.
Hi, Phil Yeoman. Are we on? Can you hear me?
We on? We will be shortly. Shout.
Hello. Hello.
Hey.
Phil Yeoman from the Pensions Regulator. I want to take us back a few slides, if I can, to the one on when we talked around CEOs and them having a leadership role in the delivery of data. And one of the things that I've noticed across the industry, and I wonder whether you would concur with this, is that there's a lack of confidence, I think, from those CEOs in actually how do they, and I use confidence to really mean they haven't got much of a clue about data in the industry. So
it's a cheap shot at a show called Big Data London, but we'll let you have it. What about CEOs and confidence, Johanna? In general.
So Phil works for me, so it's a loaded question. So
there you go.
Yeah, no, I think it is probably very true. What I'd want to see, to put it in a nutshell, is the rise of the CDOs going into your CEO posts. Once you've got CDOs that have had vast experiences in these organisations moving into CEO posts in the future, they have naturally an understanding of data within the organisations. Same if you see a CFO move into a CEO post.
That's much more common though. Many CEOs are former CFOs. I don't see many CIOs. Someone could completely contradict me. Any other questions? In which case, can I ask you to put your hands together and thank the panel? Thank you very much.